And it felt like irons were being put in my chest over and over again as I'm confessing all of this shame. And we hit a point where it was an hour and a half in. I was spent. I remember looking at the wad of tissues I had, and all my snot and all my tears in my hand, thinking to myself, like, I suddenly came back to reality and said, what the fuck did you just do? This is a person you really care about. This is a relationship you care about. You've known this person for 8 years. You've told them the worst in you. And I look over to him. He just looks back at me and he says, are you done? I said, yeah. And he got this smile and he leapt out of his chair and he gave me this huge hug and he just said, I love you. I just broke down all over again. And that moment saved my life.
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. For the disparaged, depleted, and delinquent souls trying to find our way, we're talking about the scary part of the journey where we don't know how it'll end. Let's be free to face our fucking failures in real time as the most unadulterated, truest version of who we are. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the shit show, you derelict.
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. I am your host, Josh Abandonato, and we have another special guest here today, 𝐦𝐨𝐫𝐞. Did I get it right?
Nice. Well done.
Sweet. All right. Nice. Who's Greek, right? Greek heritage, and I'm Italian, so obviously probably can tell from the last name. So close enough to where I thought I was going to get it right, but I wasn't sure. I had to ask him again right before we started. So thanks, man. James, it's so great to have you here. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure to be here, man. Our people are just separated by some water. It's no big deal.
It's very true. And I've never been to Greece. I've been to Italy a couple times, but haven't been to Greece, man. And it's been on the top of my list for a while.
Gotta come.
The most recent trip was to Spain, so I was in that general direction, but Greece has got to be soon. It just does. So let me tell you a little bit about James, and then I'm going to give him a good amount of time just introducing himself because he has a lot of really interesting things to say. So, as is true with a lot of my guests, we met online and started talking, and James had a very interesting background that I thought was really going to help the men that listen to this podcast, and I think it's going to be fascinating. One of the things that he specializes in as a certified coach is men, or people in general, but men specifically, that don't feel like they're enough. Mm-hmm. And we talked a little bit about this beforehand, James, where especially highly successful high achievers,
right,
a lot of the time still don't feel like they're enough, right? And it's just, they never seem to get to that point, more success, more achievement, etc. How am I still not enough? How do I get out of this rat race, right? And that's something I've definitely struggled with in the past. I've always been a builder, an achiever, getting something done. So if you are in that camp, please make sure to listen and watch because we're going to be addressing that quite a bit. That's one of the biggest things I think we're going to address in this episode. He also is an IFS specialist. If you're not familiar with IFS, I'll let James explain it, but it's internal family systems. I got introduced to it actually a few years ago from a therapist that I was working with, and then that therapist actually introduced me to an IFS specialist, and I went there for an entire week and kind of did an intensive with this group, and it's fascinating stuff. Different parts of us that feel different things, that manage different things, that try to protect us in different ways. And for me, it's been really fascinating just learning about myself, being a curious observer about what's going on inside of me. So I can't wait to hear a little bit more about that. And then completely, I don't know if it's unrelated or what, James, but you have a background in counterterrorism and emergency response. Can we start with that? What does that even mean?
So I was 15 when 9/11 happened.
Okay.
And I remember coming home from school, and because I went to Catholic school, they didn't tell us anything of what was happening, or they did, but in this very cryptic way that Catholic schools love to inform students, where they tell them things.
You didn't hear anything until the end of the day?
All we knew, we knew teachers were crying. They wouldn't let us watch the TV. We didn't have smartphones back then.
Right.
And they eventually called, because some people started pulling their kids out of school. And so the administration finally called an assembly, but it was a very cryptic assembly. And we all basically left thinking Cessnas hit some building. And no one really understood what was going on. And it wasn't until I got home that I turned on the TV and really realized, like, we saw the kids who had computer class, they were able to like sneak and look some things up. So they said, like, no, it's actually something bigger. And so we knew something was up. I remember my chemistry teacher was so adamant. I don't care what's happening in the world. We're still doing our test today. You guys need to learn it. And it's like, yeah, man. So
I remember that as well. I mean, we all remember where we were that day, right? It's just one of those. Yeah. I remember I went to a presentation not that long ago, and he asked the room, like, where were you on September 11th, 2001? Everybody raised their hands. He's like, where were you August 1st, 2001, right? And no one raised their hand, right? Because you have to have some sort of emotion to remember something. I apparently am slightly older than you because I was a senior in high school. And I remember being in gym class, literally lifting weights as the gym teacher rolled in the teacher. And I went to a private Christian school, so I guess, I don't know, I guess Baptists are more open to that than Catholics. I don't know what that means. But I remember him rolling in the TV and showing it to us, and just searing
very
it
different experience
in my mind. Yeah, absolutely.
So I remember going home, and I just basically planted in front of the TV. And we didn't have cable or anything because we didn't have cable where my parents lived. And so like watching TV wasn't a huge part of our day. But I remember I just sat for hours in front of the TV and I just watched it over and over and over and over again. And I just remember watching the buildings fall over and over and over and over again, and watching people jump out over and over and over again. And it was a really surreal experience because there was one point where I think I started to numb out, and I heard Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata kind of like play in my head, which that's seared in. Every time I hear that song, I think back to the images from that. And out of nowhere, by the end of the day, I became fixated on a question that just seemed to pop up of what would make someone wake up and kill thousands of people they never met, and how could we have stopped that decision in advance? And that question defined the entire rest of my life. So I was too young to join the military, and I knew pretty early on that if it was between military and intelligence, I was more attracted to intelligence. And this seemed like more of an intelligence thing anyway. So I built my entire career and interest in studies around one day joining the intelligence services. And so terrorism was my main focus. I focused on international relations. I studied sociology. I studied religions. And I became really fixated, though, on terrorist recruitment and how people join organizations like this, how the radicalization process works, how does someone get to this place? Because, again, I'm really interested in prevention. So I went down that road, and over time, as Iraq's happening, as Afghanistan's happening, as we're seeing the successes, the few successes of Western intervention, the many failures, the way my professors who were talking to people who are working in DC, it was a big question of still, how can I best serve? And I was in grad school at the time, and I'm already in my career where I'm working both for the City of Pittsburgh Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, where basically it's our job to implement directives from DHS from the federal level. And then I'm also working as an analyst, counterterror analyst, for the Region 13 Counterterrorism Fusion Center. So that's creating intelligence materials that are given out to decision makers in the public and private sectors, so that the Pittsburgh region, which is basically all of Western Pennsylvania, is more secure. We don't get caught off guard, nothing like that.
Okay.
A few things happened. Three big things happened. One was there was a lot of political infighting and red tape. And then I reached the point where I felt like I could not show up to work and nothing would be any different. That was one big thing.
Wow. Okay. Because of all the red tape.
Yeah. And people infighting because the reality was there wasn't enough work to do. I remember hearing an interview of someone who was working with doctors and surgeons in Iraq, and they said whenever there were no casualties, everyone started fighting. And because there needs to be some work, you need something to do it. And Pittsburgh had this long time where we had the G20. I worked this massive snowstorm where I was working with the National Guard, and we were sending people we were doing a lot. We went from this period of high work to nothing. And during that time of nothing, there was all this infighting, all of this politicking, and it was really just, it took the soul out of the work.
Yeah.
That's one struggle. It's a struggle a lot of people have, especially people work in government. Another thing that happened was part of my job involved deploying in support of the SWAT team. And I remember going to a hostage situation, which was a domestic, like many hostage situations, where a guy had his girlfriend and daughter held up at gunpoint. So we're at like hour 2 or 3. I'm sitting in the command post, and the negotiator finally comes out and is getting water or something. And he says, "Oh, we finally got a break. He's going to let his girlfriend and his daughter out." I said, "Oh, that's great. How'd you manage it?" And he said, "We got his mom to call." Something about that hit me in a way where I said, "Oh, this is just really sad. Like, this isn't like good versus bad. This is the only reason we're here is because this guy doesn't know how to deal with his feelings. I don't know what they are, but I know that's why we're here." And I remember his...
And this is an adult male, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is a fully adult male.
Talking to his mom, and his mom's the only one that can talk about
like, "Hun, you have to pull the gun away from your daughter and from your girlfriend and let them go out."
Wow. Huh.
And so finally they come out, and she's on her way to get checked by the medics, and the one TAC officer hits on my door, and he says, "Hey, can we have some water?" And so I hand her water, and she has that 1,000-yard stare. She's looking straight through my head, through the back of my skull, and I just feel this ice in my body. And their daughter couldn't have even been 2, like just a baby. And I sat back down after, I see her walk back. She still has a blank look, and I'm just realizing this is all about feeling. And every SWAT call I went on afterwards, whether that ended with them arresting the person, them killing the person, or the person committing suicide, all were like, I left all of them feeling this is just someone doesn't know how to deal with their feelings. That's why we're here. That's why we're here. And
it's so not to interrupt you, but it's so fascinating to me that was your response.
What do you think it should have been?
It's not a matter of should. I just think it's interesting. I think that a lot of people would not have had that response. I think a lot of people would have gotten angry or defensive or...
Oh, I got mad. I believe
that you did.
I was really angry. I mean, if you would have heard me, I'm like, what's with these motherfuckers that can't do what they're... Like, I'm going off on... And I saw the same thing happen.
But I picture, I'm sure you hate this reference, and I apologize for bringing it up this many years later, but I'm going to have to because I loved 24 and Jack Bauer. So, of course, right? Like, that's my only experience with counterterrorism is a show that I'm sure is 95% false.
Yeah.
But, I think the reason that show resonates so much with people and was so popular is because that's the approach we all want. We want just some guy going off the fucking rails, getting a gun and just killing people just to try to figure shit out. And I'm not saying you weren't angry. I just think it's interesting that you went to, this is an emotional thing.
Well, yeah. Something I became really curious about as the years went on was, so going back to terrorism, if we think about terrorism, what's unique about terrorism is all terrorism includes politics. If it doesn't include politics, it's not terrorism. So what is the difference? What would make someone join a terrorist organization instead of a political advocacy group? That's a really interesting question. There's a lot of answers to that question. We could do a whole episode about that question. But the part of my personal theory on part of that answer includes the bandwidth I have for discomfort of living in an experience that I don't like.
Oh, interesting.
Because if I want to take violence is if people who act violence, it's a quick way of feeling strong. And if I feel weak and I want to feel strong, trying to dominate someone else through coercion or force is a very cheap, fast way and short-term way to feel strong.
Yeah. Very, very different than the political process, which is not fast.
No, not fast at all. And it involves relationship building. It involves building a bigger tent. It involves winning over some people who used to be opponents. That's how you win politically. That is not the path someone can take who does not have the bandwidth. So I don't know. It is weird. I think I look at things in general in a slightly different way. So I'm not going to argue with you on that.
I love it. I think it's really fascinating because it then opens up You know, where my mind obviously goes with this is some of the conversation that we had before when we got introduced was why it. Well, let me start with this. Maybe this is an unfair assumption.
Okay.
But from everything that I've seen, it seems like terrorism is more male dominated than female dominated.
For sure. Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So then that leads me to the question of, okay, since we're going to talk about how men kind of can't process their emotions or they have a difficult time with it and society maybe doesn't help us with that, that also seems to be in line with why more men would be in the terrorist realm if they aren't dealing with their emotions or they don't feel like they have the permission to do so, etc.
Well,
So that I never would have thought that there was a tie between something like counterterrorism and emotional maturity. That's fascinating.
there is. And it's something that concerns me seeing today's current political landscape, because I was really interested in the recruitment of Westerners, specifically and especially Westerners from the United States, because we, unlike Western Europe, it's really hard to recruit a Muslim or someone from an immigrant background from the United States to turn against the U.S. That historically has been very rare because they feel American. They do not feel othered. And so I was really, really interested in what would make someone join, and especially people who have no tie. They have no tie religion or ethnicity or nationality. They join this, and you have to, a lot of times recruitment comes with finding someone who is at some level sympathetic to a cause or feels there has been a wrong. There has been a wrong against this group of people. The fastest way to get someone on your team, if I'm a terrorist recruiter, is I want to fan the flames of anger and injustice as much as I can. I want to make them really, really mad and tell them I have the way for them to take that anger into good action. And it's by joining us and making something meaningful happen with their lives. What do you want to do? Do you want to live, get some job, have some kids, or do you want to be part of an organization that's changing the world and actually fighting for good and doing the thing that's different?
You know,
that's good.
The way you just worded that, James, honestly, that sounds like politics these days.
That's what I'm telling you. Because you have to.
What you just described as terrorism is our political process in America.
Because for a moment, stop thinking about it as terrorism and think about it as joining a group. This group just happens to be violent. If you're lonely, I can exploit that. If you're angry, I can exploit that. There is so much loneliness and anger in America today. This is, I think, most relevant in right-wing terrorism, which is the biggest terrorist threat in the United States right now, statistically. And that's heavily dominated by men.
Yeah, we had a guest on here probably be a couple months ago now by the time this podcast airs. And she was talking, completely unrelated topic, but she was talking about how middle-aged men, 35 to 55, are the highest for anger, depression, suicide, all these other things right now because of this exact reason. They're so uncomfortable. They're so unhappy. They can't deal with their emotions, etc. And like you said, somebody comes along and says, oh, you're angry? Let me make you more angry, and then let me use that in order to get you on my side of whatever, right? It doesn't have to be terrorism. It could be religion, politics, some other sort of group.
And if I can get your emotions, I can bypass your reason and logic. So something that I'm pretty sure I'd have to look to find the exact source on this, but I remember reading years ago that whenever they looked at how Russian disinformation campaigns work in the U.S., it seemed that they were focusing on making conservatives angry, and they were focused on making liberals feel hopeless. And the more they could make both of those sides feel whatever they felt, they could get them to behave in the way they want to behave by just directing that anger or that hopelessness.
Wow, fascinating.
Because you're not thinking rationally whenever you're angry, or when you're flooded with any emotion, no matter what it is, rational thought has to wait.
You know, just those two words too, it's hard not to think about our current political system and even our current presidential run, or even the last couple that we've had over the last, well, let's just say the ones we've had, let's say, since 9/11. And they've all, it seems like the conservative side has always been angry about something, and the liberal side has always been, let's have hope about something. It's interesting you use those two words, because it seems like that's a lot of what gets put out there. I mean, there's been, Trump has been, people have thought of him as this anger side of things, and people side with that anger. And I'm not saying I agree or disagree with this. I'm just saying the way it's presented. And then you have somebody a few years ago like Obama, where his whole slogan was hope. That was the entire thing, right? It was the HOPE. I can still remember it, right? That's fascinating, huh?
I think that's happening now too. I think that's why Harris is having such a rise, because anger is exhausting.
Yeah.
Anger is really exhausting. It's really exhausting to always hate. And if you look at people who eventually left terrorist organizations or left terrorist ideologies, specifically people who were born more into it, a lot of the people who leave cite that as one of the reasons for leaving. It's just, I was really tired of hating everyone.
Oh, wow.
Or just living in constant hate and anger. It's so draining.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's bring this back to kind of your work with men, and bringing up the topic about...
I didn't finish actually the first question you asked, which is kind of how I got into this.
Sure, tell me.
But this will tie into this question you just asked. In my early 20s, I had a complete breakdown. And if it wasn't...
What does that mean, by the way?
I was suicidal. I looked at my future. I just saw blackness. That's literally what I saw. I was working full-time and 24/7 call-out, no days off. And I was going to grad school full-time, because that's what winners do, at night. So I'd work all day, immediately come home, and within an hour of leaving work, I was in class for 3 hours every night. And weekends were just going hard, either doing a mix of studying hard, partying hard, hooking up, getting hammered, whatever. So the point of this is I was using up all my reserves, and I had nothing left. And a few unfortunate events came together, and I just collapsed. I just snapped, and I became actively suicidal. But because of my job, I didn't think I could get help. Especially
because if you said something, you'd just be canned.
If I had a diagnosis, there were certain jobs I was looking at in the future that there's no way I could have been considered for if I had something on the mental health record.
Got it.
And I was too young to give up my career. And so I confessed, funny I'm using that word. I confided in a personal friend who was an Irish Catholic priest, much older than me. I was an agnostic atheist at this point, even though I grew up in a Catholic and Greek Orthodox household, and I went to Catholic school my whole life, up until grad school, actually. And he just said, can you come and tell me all the reasons you hate yourself? And so I sat, and he's like, can you make it another week? Because I have to go back to Ireland. I said, yeah, I'll make it another week. And I sat down for an hour and a half. He just said, why do you hate yourself? And I just kept talking. I'm blurting it all out. He just leaned back, kept asking questions. And it felt like irons were being put in my chest over and over again as I'm confessing and we hit a point where it was an hour and a half in. I was spent. I remember looking at the wad of tissues I had from all my snot and all my tears in my hand, thinking to myself, like, I suddenly came back to reality and said, what the fuck did you just do? This is a person you really care about. This is a relationship you care about. You've known this person for 8 years. You've told them the worst in you. And I look over to him. He just looks back at me and he says, are you done? I said, yeah. And he got this smile and he leapt out of his chair and he gave me this huge hug and he just said, I love you. I just broke down all over again. And that moment saved my life, not because he saved my life necessarily, but because he modeled for me what it looks like to show the worst in yourself and meet it with unconditional love. And that was a completely new experience for me. And it made me really curious again. If he can engage with me this way, can I learn how to engage with myself in this way too? Because up until this point, I always motivated myself through fear and self-criticism. You suck. Maybe if you achieve this, you'll suck less. Your worth as a person's always like, I always thought my value was on the line. That's what motivated me. And my God, did it work well? Because if your values of humans on the line, you'll do anything. You'll climb any mountain. You'll jump the highest thing. You'll work so hard, but you only deplete. You never get to add. And this allowed me to see a way where maybe there's a way I can relate to myself in a new way. So all of these three things together led me to want to maybe really curious about the way we engage with ourselves, because luckily, because of the great work that our intelligence agencies are doing, America really hasn't had many more terrorist attacks, and at least not from foreign agents. And I started thinking that's why I got into terrorism, was because this was the greatest issue facing my community. And now after this, especially this personal experience, I'm starting to see a very different issue facing our community. And it has to do with this relationship we all have with ourselves. And why I became fixated. Why so many of us in our 20s, like when we're supposed to be in the prime of our lives, why do we feel awful? Why do we feel empty? Why are we struggling to live?
Yeah.
This makes no sense. And I became really curious about that. And I've spent the last decade trying to answer two questions. Why do so many of us feel this way? And what interventions actually work to fix it? And that is what led me to where I am now in this work I'm doing with men.
That's really fascinating. And I feel like so first of all, those are two wonderful questions that I want to dig into a little bit more.
Sure.
But, when I hear you telling that story and I hear you asking those questions, I feel like a lot of what is purported these days is victim mentality in one way or the other, a blame of something.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, it's media. Well, it's social media. Well, it's this political party. Well, it's that political party, right? There's always this blame of like why this is happening. Oh, it's the economy. Oh, it's inflation. Oh, it's the Fed, right? There's always something. Mm-hmm. But all of that stuff has been around and nothing's new under the sun. Nothing's really changed. I mean, I went to this conference a little while ago and they were talking about how everybody's always talking about how the presidential debate and run and everything else is just two people attacking each other all the time. And he showed these posts. I think it was John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, a couple of the founding fathers of our nation. And he showed what they said about each other, basically calling their women whores and talking about how they're just cheating everybody and how they're all going to get murdered if they voted for the other person. Right? That's our founding fathers. So nothing's changed.
Yeah, nope.
And you take that back even further, goodness sake, it's been a lot worse. Okay, so let's just bring up both of our societies. Greece and Italy have had far worse times where people just get murdered if they don't agree with something, right? Mm-hmm. So nothing new is under the sun. And it's also not new to just blame everything else. So I guess, I guess this probably leads into then maybe where you're going next as far as, so I specifically want to get to a couple things. I do want to get to IFS and talk a little bit about that, but I specifically also want to get to men in our society and why this seems to be, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen with women, but I just want to focus on men for a second, and why this seems to be such an epidemic with men that are unable, maybe unwilling, maybe both, to reach into themselves and actually, relate to themselves the way that you were just talking about. What do you think that is? What have you learned in your work?
I would probably use the language of men feel prevented from being able to do this. I don't know if that's the most elegant way to put it. But when I look at this problem, it's kind of like asking, why does a thunderstorm exist? It's like, how deep and how early do you want to go? Because I can say this thunderstorm exists because there's cold air meeting warm air very rapidly, and that leads to all of these effects. But why does that happen? Well, that's because there's winds and there's currents. Why that's happened? Well, there's big oceans and the earth rotates. Why does that happen? So it's this Russian nesting dolls. But if we start, if we go to what I think is the most useful that we can all relate to way of looking at this, is I would say the most succinct answer is that men have been put in a societal box for what emotions they're allowed to feel, how they're allowed to feel them, and who they're allowed to feel them with. I would say that this really exploded after the 1950s. And this became this idea of the independent male, which is a complete break from how men have lived really up until this point, and this ideal of a strong, independent man who's able to succeed entirely on his own, be heavily competitive, doesn't need any allies because he's a strong lone wolf, kills our emotional selves because no human is built to live this way, man or woman. Humans are hypersocial animals. Men are human, therefore men are social animals.
Right.
And this is anecdote, but all of the happiest men I know are men who feel like they're part of teams.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
if that's true, something's wrong with this image we have. Because another part of this image is that a man's supposed to he's a master of his feelings. He doesn't have any big feelings. And he certainly doesn't need to talk to anyone about them. That is a sign of weakness. And 𝐦𝐨𝐬𝐤𝐞 wrote a book called, just read it, Deep Secrets. And she's a social psychologist, and she studied boys and adolescents in high school in New York City. And her argument, among many in her book, which is very good and I recommend to anyone, is that boys know how to be emotional, how to emotionally relate, how to be close with their best friends. Like, you hear boys talking about their other male friends saying, I love my best friend. I would go nutso without him. I need someone to tell the secrets about. I need someone to talk to about what's happening in my house that I can't talk to other people about. I need a best friend. But something happens whenever they go through adolescence, and she was giving this feedback of this 17-year-old in her book saying, everyone, life is hard. People betray you. You can't trust people. When I was young, I used to think I needed other people, but that was just because I was immature. I don't need to talk to anyone about this. And then the interviewer will ask, well, would you like to have a close friend? And they speak out of both sides of their mouth. They're like, nah, man, only a weak person needs a close friend, but yeah, I wouldn't mind it. And I'm reading this, and I'm like, I just got off a call with a 45-year-old who said these exact words.
The exact same thing.
And it struck me. And so her argument is that it's wrong to say that men lack these abilities because they clearly have them. They feel something about the transition from boyhood to manhood comes with a social dictate of this can't be part of you. This can't be, there are certain feelings you're not supposed to have that you're not supposed to display, and with people and there's limits on who you're supposed to do this with. A way she looks at it that I think is very useful is she said, men don't want to be, let's look at another way. Feelings were given both gender and sexuality. There's feminine feelings and there's masculine feelings. Then there's straight behavior and gay behavior. Mm-hmm. And the irony is that living in a society where homosexuality is accepted makes people afraid, for whatever reason, of being labeled gay. And that makes men feel like I'm not supposed to be close to other men. And it was heartbreaking for me as I'm reading her book. And she was saying even some of the mothers that she knew would describe their teenage kids saying, well, I think he might be gay because all he wants to do is hang out with his best friend. And I'm reading it like, I remember being a teenager, spending all day at school, and then calling my best friend as soon as I got home. This had nothing to do with sex. I just wanted to talk to the person I felt closest with. And why? Why did feelings have to be given a sexuality? And why do they have to be given a gender? And this is something that really came from the 50s, it seems, from the reading I've done, where there were feminine feelings that were very soft. Love, compassion, understanding, sadness, heartbreak, these very gentle things. And then there's the masculine ones of force, drive, dominance, power. And those are masculine
Anger.
feelings.
Yeah.
And I constantly now find myself on podcasts arguing about this idea because it sounds so insane to me when someone says to me, men have a need to feel powerful. And I say, yes, they do. And so do women. And just as men have a need to feel loved, just as women do. Like my experience with my mentor that I just spoke about was me experiencing love from one man to another that saved my life. How could I knock this and call that feminine? That's insane to me.
It is insane, but you're absolutely right that it's in our society. You're 100% right.
So if I'm a guy,
and for everyone listening or watching as well, I'm going to put a link to Deep Secrets by Naomi Way, and I'm going to read it myself because it sounds fascinating. So there's a link in the bio. Go check it out.
Yeah, and I realize I'm starting to go on a soapbox.
No, you're good on a soapbox. No, I tend to agree with. So, we're both around the same age, and I think one of the thing that we grew up with in the '90s, especially, was kind of what do they call it, the gay explosion or whatever they call it, where it's especially the '90s was that time where it's like it's okay to be gay, like let's talk about being gay.
Just starting to come out, yeah.
Gay people on on TV and everything else, whereas before it was kind of hush hush, let's not really talk about it, and then that started becoming more prevalent. And then, I was actually just thinking about a show, and it doesn't just happen on Seinfeld, but Seinfeld just happens to be my favorite show. And because it's the best show ever. And anyone that wants to argue with me, you're just wrong. It's the best show ever. So, but there's several instances and episodes about that. But I remember one specifically, and I don't even remember which episode it is, but they're talking about, he's like, well, but I'm not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And they keep repeating that line.
And that's in the book, same thing. The guys will say no homo, then they'll say I have nothing against gays, but no homo. And they're like, why are they going through this? What's going on?
Yeah, what is it just about a guy trying to connect with another guy that all of a sudden is gay? I've never been gay. I have zero interest in being gay. I love connecting with guys because honestly, there's something that I get from masculine energy, especially men with masculine energy. I'm not saying just men. Obviously, we all have masculine and female energies and traits. That's not what I'm saying. But there's something about connecting with a man that has good masculine energy, which you do, clearly. It comes across. You can just tell. It's just, it's not something you have to analyze. You can just tell that it's there. And we all have different masculine energy in different ways. But there's something about that makes me want to rise up and get challenged and do better and go to the next level of my life that frankly doesn't happen with women with a lot of feminine
Absolutely
energy.
True. Completely
Now, that
agree.
being said, I absolutely need females and feminine energy in my life. Two of my best friends are both female, and I just went through a very difficult breakup and everything else a little over a month ago, and they have been outstandingly helpful for me, bringing a different perspective that my guys never bring to that conversation. So I'm not saying we don't need that. I'm just saying from my perspective, and we could do a whole other podcast about this, and I have done them in the past, a lot of what seems to be happening in our society right now is that because most of masculinity seems to be viewed as bad or toxic or chauvinistic or whatever word you want to use, a lot of the times the answer is just get more feminine energy.
Yeah, no.
And that doesn't help because we need both energies. So
Well,
I don't want to get off on a soapbox either, like you don't.
I don't know if I even buy into this idea though. I when I hear people talk about male energy or feminine energy or the divine masculine or divine feminine, if you want to dress it up more, I just ask, what is your evidence for this? Because I think everything being named here is human. All I'm hearing from what you're saying is I'm a human who likes being around humans. Sometimes I like being around male humans. Sometimes I like being around female humans because each of them have different things. I think if we look at what are the issues men face, like, I don't know how to word this perfectly, but it's almost like the best way to look at it is actually to say, what are the struggles that men have uniquely had to face and how can we help them with it? Which is a different way to enter the issue than what makes a man different than a woman.
So what do you think is the answer to that?
I think men have been put in a very small emotional box where it makes it impossible to win.
Or it makes them what?
It makes them filled with shame. And men are acutely able at feeling shame, and there's some research that suggests that. And there's nothing. I don't know if there's a worse emotion to feel in the world than shame. And it's the one I specialize in. It's the one I specialize in because that's been my biggest battle is consistently exploring my shame, my relationship with it. Because everyone who is a major self-critic has deep shame. It's part of the deal. Because if there is, and this touches on the IFS stuff, if there is a part of me that is criticizing me, even though it's showing up as your worst enemy, I promise you, 99.9% of the time, it's doing this because it's trying to help you. Because if I can adopt the most critical voice I can from the outside world, and I can preemptively give that to you, I can get you to behave in a way where you'll be safe in the outside world because you're already taking care of this thing. But in order for someone to criticize, there must be someone on the other end who's being criticized. And so we've all had that experience where if someone came to you and they said something about you that you don't have any internal feeling of, it would kind of roll off. If someone came to you and said like, oh, your hair's done, but you have no feeling about your hair, you would say, that was just really weird. Okay. Like it might make you feel odd, but then you get over it because it doesn't hit anything inside you. But if they said, you're a failure to your family, and there's a part of you that feels like a failure to your family, oh boy, are you going to feel that.
Yeah.
Because that wound's inside. And so the trap that men and women alike get into, because this is a human issue, shame is a human feeling. The trap we get into is when we think we can achieve enough or achieve things in a way that will fix the thing about us that we think is wrong. But the truth is that this whole strategy is bound to fail because we're starting with the assumption that you're broken. And as soon as the longer you continue down that road, every time you're doing this at some level, you're reinforcing the belief I'm broken and I need to do something about it. Where the belief of I'm being broken itself is a wound that, in my experience, is best to address directly. Where did that come from? Why do you feel that way? Can we just be with this feeling? It's not a feeling you're going to be able to beat out of yourself, achieve out of yourself. Let's meet it. Let's work with it. And it doesn't have to rule your life.
Maybe we just take a moment on this for a moment. And for any of the listeners or viewers right now that are feeling shame. Now, maybe that's a little too vague because maybe we all feel shame over
we all feel shame.
something.
Everyone does.
But I think, there's degrees, obviously. There are people that are living in more shame than others, like you described your life as a young 20-something. What do you say to them?
The presence of this feeling does not mean something's wrong with you. It just means that there is a presence of the feeling of shame. It starts and it ends with that, objectively. This is not proof. Because there's a voice inside that says, I'm afraid that I'm broken, does not mean that you're broken. It just means that there's a voice inside that's saying, I'm afraid that I'm...
That's really good. I don't remember where I picked it up. I don't even remember if it was an IFS thing or what, but I heard the phrase curious observer a long time ago.
Yes.
And I've always thought that I was really that's really helped me a lot, where if I get stuck in an emotion or if I get stuck in a shame cycle, which means that now it's not me noticing that I'm angry, but I am anger, right? If I notice that I'm sucked up into something, some sort of emotion, shame, whatever it is, I've noticed that one of the most surefire ways for me to get out of it is to figure out how to be a curious observer of what's happening.
Bingo.
And it's almost as if like, that's interesting. I have kids, so it helps me because I can think of it this way. I can be like, interesting. My son is angry over there. I wonder why my son's angry. I think he's maybe feeling some fear, etc. Right? If I can do that with myself, then I can be as impartial of not only a judge, but also somebody that might be able to help, like I can with my son.
Because you're no longer reacting to your
my
son.
feeling. It's easy for me to stay distant and be like, oh, interesting. I wonder why, blah, blah. But for myself, it's like, I'm all wrapped up in it. Right?
And as a father, I'm not a father, but I imagine as a father, that gives you the bandwidth to be a resource then for your son.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're not just reacting to this kid's angry and I need to do something about that.
If I can do it. Now, again, I have 3 children and they're all pretty young.
Perfect.
And it's easy for me to just get caught up in whatever they're caught up in, right? Like my middle child, I have 2 daughters and a son. My middle child is a girl, and she's 9, but she's definitely a preteen in a lot of ways. And she'll get really caught up. She's always been a very emotional, exaggerated, whatever person, which I have no idea where she gets that from. And she'll get wrapped up in this stuff and just not be able to get out of it. And because I'm similar, it's easy for me just to get ramped up, and then we ramp each other up, right? Instead of what I've had to learn to do with her is literally I'll tell myself, just observe what's happening. I tell myself all the time with her, just observe what's happening. just observe what's happening. And if I can observe her, then I can stay calm. I can keep a quiet voice, and I can talk to her about it. And I can be like, huh, interesting. So you're feeling angry. Why are you feeling angry, do you think? Huh,
Right.
why did that affect you that way, etc. And it might sound dumb, and maybe you have a better approach to this, but what I would encourage people to do is, for me at least, it helps for me to actually say those things out loud. Like if I'm starting to feel all this anger dwell up inside of me, what I sometimes will do is I'll just be like, huh, why am I angry right now? Where's that anger coming from? To go back to IFS, what part of me is angry? Is it this part or this part or this part? I have all my parts named, so I know exactly what name I can call out. And just be like, huh, I wonder why. Oh, so they are trying to do this, and they're actually trying to help me. And going back to your previous point, which maybe I'll let you expand on a little bit, because obviously, you know, we could spend hours just talking about IFS, and maybe I'll have you come back and talk about IFS sometime if you have a good time today, because I'd love to hear more about it. But I guess one of the questions that I would ask is, are there any tips or tricks or things to consider to try to help you stay a curious observer instead of getting enmeshed with your feelings?
Sure. I'll share the two that are most useful for me.
Thank you.
I find it very useful to first really hold the assumption that there are no bad parts, that nothing of what I'm feeling is trying to be my enemy. So let's be specific and say the critic. Critic's not trying to kill me. The one that like almost made me suicidal, at the end of the day, was doing its job. I didn't necessarily want to die because I wanted to stop living. I really wanted a 5-minute break from the voice in my head telling me I sucked. That was really what it was. That part was doing what it had been trained to do, which was the worse I felt, the more it should dig into me, because the more it can make me feel bad, the bigger response I can get to work hard and do something good or productive. The problem was when it tried to implement this, I didn't have anything left to give because I already burned it all. So it wasn't trying to ruin me. It was doing what it knew from its point of view. Hey, every time James feels bad, if I rip on him for himself, that motivates him to do more. So I learn I should rip on him when I see something that scares me. So if I assume the critic has a good intent, if I assume something, let's say that, because everyone who has high shame and high criticism has some sort of a way they have to burn this off. So some sort of a vice. In talking with men, the most common things I talk about are video games or porn. What can I distract myself with? So let's say there's something you're constantly gaming or constantly engaging in porn. What's that part of you? How's it trying to help? How does it help you to do this? And because other people will come because of issues like that, and they're like, I really need to fix this. And I'm like, I hear you, but I want us to think about this in a different way. Let's think about a tea kettle on the stove. You're coming to me because it's whistling. I hear the whistle. I know you want it to stop whistling. But what I'm really curious about is the fire under it that is making the heat to create the whistle in the first place.
What's the cause, right? What's the cause? For sure.
And the cause is almost always going to be something deeply tied to shame that is majorly being poked because of circumstances right now. That if I have a wound of feeling absolutely worthless and things conspire in the world around me that trigger that feeling, oh man, are all of my parts going to try to save me from this or get involved? So to get back to your question, if we assume that everyone has a positive intent, or at least does not mean harm, how can we engage with them? What I like to do when I'm by myself and I don't have someone to work with, and I do think IFS is easiest to do when you're working with someone else, but you can do work with it on your own, at least with a lot of types of parts. I write. And this is something I did way before I knew about anything about IFS. I would just go to a coffee shop sometime, open my laptop, and I would just let my fingers go. I might type gibberish. I might just hammer like keys, and then I'll start putting words. And I keep putting words. I just keep typing everything that wants to come out until there's nothing else to put out. And then I can look back on it and I can say, oh, there's a part of me that feels blank. There's another part of me that feels blank. Another part of me that feels blank. But giving space for the different parts of us to exist, which I think is a way of saying you can think of parts and feelings sometimes as interchangeable. So it's like giving our emotions permission to exist. The part of me that feels blank that's what they want. They just want to speak and be heard. And I really like, I forget the name of the author, but the book, I think it's The Untethered Soul, if that's the title of it, where he has a line that's not an IFS book, but he has a line in it, which is the most IFS thing I've ever read, which is, you are not the voices in your head. You are that which hears the voices in your head. And if I take that, my question is, then how can I be a good listener or good observer or good witnesser? For me, that works really well with typing. I know other people who they'll draw and they'll scribble and they'll make drawings of all their different feelings. I know people who will paint. It doesn't matter what it is. Do you have some way to express what's inside and give everything permission to exist before we even think about making a decision or taking action? Can we just give everything permission to exist? And if you just do that, my God, your life will be easier, because you're not spending all your energy trying to manage your feelings. You're giving them a place that they can go, that they can be expressed, and that you can reflect upon them.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. And we've talked about this on the show before, but there are no bad feelings, right? There are 100%. Feelings that are more difficult for us to feel. And frankly, from my experience, that's not true for everyone. I mean, some people find this emotion, some people find anger more difficult to feel, some people find resentment, some people find joy, whatever. There's different feelings, and it's not the same for all of us. But
a trick that's useful with that is that if you're facing a feeling that's hard for you to face, know that there's then two feelings here. There's this feeling, and there's another feeling of this is difficult to face. And if we think about it as parts, there's a part I'm looking at, and there's another part of me that's really uncomfortable looking at this part of myself. And naming those two makes this easier to deal with.
Yeah, and back to what you said as well, it's acknowledgement and acceptance is what I'm hearing as well.
Yeah.
It's just acknowledging that these feelings exist, or these parts exist, whatever word you want to use interchangeably. It's acknowledging that they exist, and then it's also accepting the fact that they exist. Just acknowledgement's not enough, because I also have to accept the fact that anger exists right here, and the uncomfort of the anger exists here, and that's okay. That's okay. That doesn't define me. It doesn't mean that's who I am. And, we could have obviously another episode on the fact that addiction comes from this, because when there's a part of me that's uncomfortable with whatever's going on and I don't want to feel that, then I can go to the two things that you mentioned, video games or porn, or I could go to drugs and alcohol, or I could go to shopping, or I could go to validation, or I could go to on and on and on and on and on, right? There's plenty of things that we could use for that. But it all just seems to come back down to discomfort with a part of me that's actually trying to help me.
Right. And what I like about IFS is, so when you talked about observer, before I was engaged with IFS, I spent a lot of time in meditation, learning about meditation, getting trained or taking a course on it, studying it, practicing it. And I remember my teacher, she was a psychologist, and she'd say, let's just be really curious about this, or can we show up to this as if it's the first time? Can we be like an explorer? Like we've never seen this before. And equanimity was her favorite word that she'd bring up, of can I find every feeling within myself and meet it with this kind of open neutralness where I can be open to it. And so that taught me, like, I had a lot of shame. I remember in that class when I was going through my meditation class in my chest, where I would if we were doing a body scan, I would just leave while we're at the chest, and I'd come back immediately after. And I told her, I don't know why I'm doing this, and I can't seem to stop it, even when I want to do this. And she just said, can you turn your attention to your chest and tell me what's there? I just started crying. Like, did not expect it, didn't feel this at all. She's like, all right, well, there's something for you to observe there. It wasn't until IFS, though, that I could not just observe that, but realize I can talk to it. I can have a conversation with that feeling in my chest, and I can become an engaged observer who's saying, hey, I see you feel this way. Can you tell me what's going on for you? And I actually got information back, and I was going back to earlier times of my life, earlier experiences, and I'm like, oh, I know why this is here. And the more I can understand it, the more space I have for it, more compassion I have for my own feelings, and the easier it is to do the acceptance that you just named as being so important.
Can I tell you a story as we wrap up here? So I was just thinking about how what we're doing, how uncomfortable I was growing up, and for most of my life, frankly, with a lot of different emotions and not being able to process them, not sitting with them. And then, of course, there's multiple layers, like you already mentioned, about discomfort there. And I remember one thing that I will never forget is when I went to those IFS therapists and spent a week with them. And early on in the week, I was sitting with one of the therapists. It was just me and her in her office. And I don't even remember what we were talking about, but we were doing some sort of parts work. And it's my only experience ever of what therapists or psychology or wherever this term came from, disassociation. At least that's what she said it was. And it felt like it. And I remember sitting on my chair and we were going through something. And this sounds really woo-woo, and I have a hard time even saying it because I'm just not a very woo-woo person. Mm-hmm. But I remember physically feeling like I left my body and I was floating in the air staring at my body because whatever we were bringing up, my parts were working overtime to try to protect me from whatever hurt they thought was going to come to me.
Yep.
And I just will never forget her saying, basically her talking me back, Josh, are you with me? This is what's happening. And she just had a very, soothing, calming, she was great at her job, demeanor. And she brought me back into that. And the thing that's always stuck with me in that moment was I was at a point in my life where I was so uncomfortable with these different feelings and emotions and everything else that I was having that the only response my parts could come up with was just to leave, just entirely kick me out.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how the spiritual realm and everything else works into that. I'm not going to say that I'm an expert on what happened. I just know what happened. And I know how it felt. And ever since that moment is when, that'll always stick with me of the reason that happened is because I'm not acknowledging and accepting and loving those parts that are really just trying the best for me. There's a cliche that gets said in society all the time. They're doing the best they can. And I frankly hate it and could do an entire episode about how much I hate that phrase. However, I think it applies here.
Yeah,
I really do.
Yeah, it does.
Because I think that parts are like humans in a lot of ways, where if somebody's well-meaning, it's like you're going through something, you're going through some grief, and then there's all of a sudden well-meaning people all over the world telling you how to deal with your grief. And you're like, thanks a lot, but that doesn't help me at all based on where I'm at in my grief. But they're still well-meaning, right? That's how I think of parts a lot of the times. Like, it's like the people that don't know what to say to you at a funeral. Right? I just lost my mother, and they're going to say something because they're well-meaning, but they don't necessarily know how, and they're trying to do it to make me feel better and not have me hurt, etc. But they could just be making the problem worse.
This is a slight tangent, but if we bring this back to men, I think a common question I've heard from men, to add something real quick,
please.
After the 50s, women were tasked with all the feeling jobs. So they were taught how to emotionally attune, how to pay attention to someone else's feelings, how to read their husbands, their children, and know how to engage with them. Men weren't.
Right.
And so, yet this hurt both sides. This burdened women too much with something that was not fair to put all on them because they had to find ways to cope with it. And there's a reason why drinking went up for women so much, why tranquilizer use went up for women so much. There was a lot of numbing out because that's an impossible job to hold all of the feelings of everyone.
Absolutely.
It also screwed men because they didn't know how to, being able to attune emotionally is a critical way to have relationships. So if I want to be friends with you, I need to be able to have some way of reading your feelings and getting a sense of where you're at so that we can relate. I can speak your language. We can connect at the same ways at the same times. So I've seen where men who want to reconnect with other men or others, women, whatever, they'll come with the exact thing you said. My buddy just had a death. I have no idea what to do with him. And my answer is, I don't think that's That's not what this is. And I'll ask them, can you think of a time where you had a loss? And what mattered really to you? Was it someone coming with a perfect piece of advice? Or was it someone just coming with an open heart and saying, I'm here with you? You want to talk? We can talk. You don't want to talk? We don't have to talk. But you don't have to be alone. And that itself is such a fundamental way of not just dealing with others that I'm saying this because I want the people listening to know, if you're a guy and you're wondering how to be there for other men, your presence is the biggest gift.
100%.
Let the guy choose
100%.
or the girl choose how she wants to spend the gift of your presence, but your gift is presence. And as long as you're offering that, you're already done. Don't put pressure on yourself. Don't feel like there's a magical thing you have to come up with. You're doing the thing that matters most. And it's also a guide for how to deal with our feelings. What's the best gift we can give to any of our parts or any of our feelings? Presence, acceptance. This is how you're feeling right now. I'll be with you. You want to talk? Cool. You don't want to talk? Cool. You don't have to be alone, though. I see you.
Yeah, I loved your story of the priest. Just being present with you in that moment and letting you say everything that you need to say. And he didn't even need to give you any advice. It didn't sound like he did give you any advice. He just hugged you and said that he loved you, and that was it.
That was it.
And frankly, when I go through times of grief in my own life, the people that always mean the most to me and always have the biggest impact on me are never the ones that give me advice, ever. Never. And I, as I would say, maybe the typical male, can be a fixer for sure, right? Like, what's the problem? Here's the solution. Let's fix it. But those are never the ones that really make a meaningful impact on me. It's always the people that are just, I'm here for you. I care for you. I love you. I'm here.
There's a good course called In Love While Parenting that it's an app and it's based off research, and there's these little videos and clips about, like, here's a way when you're parents to engage with each other so that you can be better parents and have a better relationship, blah, blah, blah. And it's really, you don't have to be a parent at all. It helps everyone. But that's one of their big points is it's presence and there's appropriateness. If someone's in crisis mode, this isn't the time to offer ideas. Be there for them. However, there might be a time later where your ideas are really critical. And so whenever this topic comes up, men fix, women be present with, my answer is, again, we're splitting human needs. You need both. Give time for presence. And then, like, when someone comes to me, when one of my friends now outside of a work environment comes to me with an issue, I always ask them first, how do you want me to show up for you right now? Do you just want me to be a friend and support you and listen? Are you looking for me to dig into my professional knowledge to maybe give you a thought or two? I'm not going to work with you, but to give you a thought or two. Or do you want to know what I would do personally, just as another human in this situation? What can I do for you? I let them pick. Most of the time, I just want someone to talk to.
And thank you so much for bringing that up too. I remember I learned that a few years ago, and I try to remember. I often forget, but I try to remember that when friends bring it to me as well, especially if they're calling and they want to check in. I have guys that check in with me every single week, all the time. And I try to remember when they call, like, what do you need right now? Do you need listener Josh? Do you need fixer Josh? Do you need practical application Josh? You know, because people know what they need, but we don't ask.
That's coming back to presence and just what do you want to do? And I remember there was another guy I was talking to about this where he was bailing on a friend because he felt so awful about certain things happening in his life. And his friend at first wanted to be supporting and said, yeah, man, if you need the night off, we don't have to go out. And then he called back 2 minutes later. No, man, fuck that. You don't have to talk. We're still going out for wings. If you want to be quiet and watch the TV the whole time, I'll do it with you. I just don't want you to do it alone. And he was like, I even felt when he's saying that, like, he's like, I cannot tell you how much that meant to me, him saying that.
Absolutely. I'll tell one quick story on that too, and then I know we're going to wrap up here. But
sure.
A few weeks ago, at least as of the recording of this podcast, I was going through a hard time, definitely dealing with some grief, etc. I was supposed to be hanging out with my buddy that night, And it was just one of those times where I just got paralyzed and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was healthiest for me, which happens sometimes. And it's a reason I've written down what healthy activities are for me, what unhealthy activities are, et cetera. Because honestly, I'll even look at the list because sometimes I get so in it that I can't even think about what to do. So I'm looking at this and, I basically was telling him, like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I can hang out. I don't know if I want to go out. I don't know. I don't know. Right? And he's like, well, not a big deal either way, blah, blah, blah. And then he did the exact same thing. He's like, look, I'm coming to your house. And he lives 45 minutes away, by the way. This is not a short drive. And it's in the middle of the week on a weekday, on a school night, so to speak.
Nice. Yeah.
And he said, look, if you don't want to go out, that's fine, but I'm coming to your house. And we're going to smoke a cigar on your back porch. That's one of the things we like doing together. He's like, and I'm just going to be there. And I don't give a shit what mood you're in. I don't care about your emotions. I don't care what you want to do. I'm just going to be there.
Yeah.
And I literally started crying the moment he said that. Because I was like, yep, that's what I need. I just need somebody to show up, man. I don't need anything else. Yeah. We don't need to go do something. I just need somebody to show up. That's it. That's where I'm at right now. And it was beautiful.
And this to circle back to men, this is what, because of that idea of, I have no idea where it came from. I have some ideas, but I don't know what has validated of that independent male, where everything mankind, men as a group, everything we've always done best, that we've always done as groups, it's just the power of that connection. And the cool thing is, on one day you get to receive it, and on the next day you get to give it. And if you think it's really cool to have a guy show up and give you the gift of presence, it feels fucking amazing to give it to someone else as well.
Absolutely. And I am going to make a quick plug for the listeners and the viewers. We actually have a private Facebook group that we started a few months ago for this exact reason. We're trying to build the Derelict Tribe as a space where only men are invited. Call me sexist, do whatever you want. But it's a safe space.
There's value in it, given the struggles of men. I understand why. Go ahead.
Yeah, but there's a safe space for men to come talk about whatever they want to talk about. It's completely private. If anybody ruins that, they are immediately ejected. There's no warning or anything else. But it's a space where men can come and talk about some of these things because it's rough. And I say this on almost every single episode. I'm here. My email is in the show notes. Leave a comment, shoot an email. Obviously, we have another friend here as well that's here for you. So reach out to James. You'll have his information in the show notes. And as we wrap up, first of all, I just want to thank you, James, so much for being here, man. This has been really, really amazing.
And thank you for what you're doing.
One day and we can talk more about IFS because that'd be a fun talk as well. But for everyone, please read the show notes, like, subscribe. And again, that's not for me. It's only so that this message can get out to more men. Because frankly, I want every single man to hear this episode and to hear about how they can actually start dealing with this stuff that's so difficult to do. I did not learn how to do this myself until my mid-30s. I went through 30-something years of my life before I figured out how to start doing this. And I'm still figuring it out at 40. So there's plenty of men like me. So please, even more importantly, share this with a guy. Just share this with your best friend. I don't care who it is. Some guy that just needs to hear it. Feel free to share it to a woman as well. But guys especially, I know, need to hear this message.
And if I could just throw one thing onto that too, is I wish I had said this much earlier. Everything I do was hard for me. So I get it. And the only thing I'll add in is I think your pitch was perfect. The only thing I'll add in is give yourself a little bit of grace if this is hard and you screw up while you're trying to do it.
Thank you. Absolutely. I have to remind myself that on a almost daily basis, especially back to the previous point, right, of the high achiever, high success mindset. It's hard for us to do. So thank you, James. Man, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
All right, you guys. Until the next time, we will see you later, you derelicts.